Welcome everybody to Honey Bee's Symposia series, the first in our 2026 year. We're in our fourth year, so bravo that you guys keep supporting us and evidently want more content. And here we are supplying you with a whole new year of four interesting programs. My name is Steve Rogenstein. I'm your host today and Honey Bee's project director. And we are going to hear today about a project that we worked on for a number of years, which in the end is a source of pride and accomplishment. With a team of 14 bee scientists, we reassessed the IUCN Red List status of wild Apis mellifera in Europe, and that resulted in a new classification, which we'll talk about today. We've assembled some of the players in that work who will provide context as to what is IUCN, its red list for threatened species, the process, challenges, and rationale of the reassessment, as well as during the panel discussion, what some implications and possible next steps might be. To start, I'll briefly introduce Honey Bee Watch for anyone who's new. We're an international coalition tasked with better understanding the biological, behavioral, and environmental factors that bolster survival among free-living honeybees. And by free living, we mean bees that have chosen where they want to live, whether that be in trees, in log hives, buildings, holes in the ground, wherever. And generally, they're living with very little to no human intervention. So our aim with Honey Bee Watch is to develop nature-based solutions to lower the mortality rates of managed colonies, to increase beekeeping sustainability, and most importantly, and ultimately, to protect the threatened wild populations around the world. We've been around for 6 years, and in that time, with the help of our research partners and participating citizen scientists, we have identified more than 2,000 nest sites on 5 continents, many of which are viewable in our mapping platform. Today, you're going to hear about our work with IUCN, which has been something that we've been working on for quite some time. We're also part of a consortium called FreeBee that was awarded a €1 million grant from Biodiversity Plus through the European Commission. And that money is to support extensive study for 3 years of free-living colonies, which I might refer to as FLCs in the future, so just mind that. And we're going to be doing that research, we are doing that research in France, Ireland, Poland, Portugal, and Sweden. We talked about this last year in March of 2025, and if you're curious about that, you can watch the video, or you can learn more about the study and even participate as a citizen scientist on the website. So that is Honey Bee Watch in a nutshell. What I'd like to do is just quickly present a brief introduction to the Symposia series in general. As I said, we're in our 4th year. Our primary goal was to bring this free-living honeybee community together so that our experts, our guests, could meet one another and exchange their expertise and their knowledge, for you to get exposed to their work, for you to connect and interact. Sometimes these chats are very lively, so we encourage you to interact with one another. And of course, to explore relevant and challenging topics. And so that brings us to today's program, our first symposium of the year, that's titled IUCN Red List, Wild Honeybees Labeled Endangered in EU. As you'll hear, Honey Bee Watch pulled together 14 bee scientists to reassess the red list status of wild Apis mellifera in Europe. Previously, they had been categorized as data deficient in 2014. Back then, there wasn't much data that had been collected on the FLCs. However, in these intervening years, many independent studies have located them, started monitoring them, and have learned much more about them. So we saw an opportunity to bring these folks together, along with citizen scientists, to collect more data, pool our resources, and work together for their eventual protection around the world. And one early kind of dream of Honey Bee Watch was to update this data deficient status, which we did in October and which you'll hear more about right now. Our last but not least speaker, Benjamin, is quite the force in bee research. He's written or co-authored something like 40 papers on FLCs and related topics. He's done research on wild honeybees in Germany, Switzerland, Spain, Portugal, in Asia, Africa, and North America. And now he's going to discuss a research paper that he co-authored with Patrick Kohl, who unfortunately is not with us here today, but was part of the IUCN Task Force, which served as the basis for the species endangered classification. So if you are ready, we're ready for you.
Okay, thank you very much for the nice introduction and the invitation to speak here. So today I want to present this study that Patrick Kohl and I did, where we used available monitoring data on wild living colonies to estimate the status of Apis mellifera in the wild. And this was later also adopted by the assessors. So um, yeah, if we look globally, the number of managed hives is increasing. So you can see the black line. And also in Europe, managed hives after an initial decline after the crash of the Union are increasing again. But what about the wild population? So if we look at this interesting study on the right, we see that actually globally, most colonies are wild colonies. But in Europe, the situation is a bit different. And in Europe, we have a much larger managed population, and which is about 4 to 6 times larger than the wild one. So as you can already see, it's a bit tricky to assess the honeybee in Europe in the wild because we have these two subpopulations. So let's dive a bit into that. So on one hand, we have the managed colonies, as you can see in the photo, the beekeepers' colonies in blue. On the other hand, the wild living or free living colonies in trees or buildings. And of course, as there is no clear barrier between these two subpopulations, there is migration. So usually swarms from beekeeper colonies they escape and they can form nests in the wild population. Also the other way around, so that the beekeeper uses bait hives to catch swarms from wild colonies, but this is in Europe not so often done, so we can neglect this here at the moment. And if we look at the IUCN, there is a definition for wild subpopulation. So this goes the following. Subpopulations dependent on direct intervention are not considered wild if they would go extinct within 10 years without intensive management, such as regularly supplementing the population from captive stock to prevent imminent extinction. And what does this mean for us? So this regular supplementation is actually what's happening with the swarms from the apiaries. So to um, to really assess the wild subpopulation of Apis mellifera, we have to we have to make this theoretical assumption that managed colonies do not swarm. So then we just look at the wild colonies and we look how the cohort size of these wild living colonies under the theoretical scenario that managed colonies do not swarm evolves. And if we look at this now, we have this annual population growth rate, lambda, which consists of the survival S and the reproduction B. So if lambda is bigger or equal to 1, the population is increasing or is stable, and if it's smaller than 1, the population is declining. In the wild, it's not so easy to assess the swarming rate of wild colonies, but we have relatively good data of unmanaged colonies, and we assume that a colony that survives produces 2 swarms per year. And so with that, then we only have to we have to measure the survival. And here a thought experiment, if we want a stable population, we need a survival of 33%. So every third colony has to survive. Of course, this is much lower than, for example, what beekeepers want to have for survival. So for measuring the survival rates, you can see a monitoring scheme here. So you should visit this known nest sites of honeybees at least twice. So once in spring before the swarming season starts, and once after the swarming season in early summer. And yeah, with that you can calculate the survival of these populations. And as Arrigo already said, we are lucky because in 2014, when Apis mellifera was assessed as data deficient, now we have a couple of studies that monitored colonies, and we have survival rates in 7 countries in Europe. And we use these survival rates to project the 10-year population trend of this wild subpopulation in Europe. So here you can see these different studies. There is one study in each country, except for Germany, where we have multiple studies. And so the first one is from Poland, from Andrzej Oleksa and colleagues, and they found honeybee colonies in cavities in rural avenues in northern Poland. And they monitored them from 2013 till 2015. The second is a study from Germany, where Sebastian Roth and Felix Remter monitored colonies in the city of Munich. And you can see it's quite a large data set. So 107 nest sites were monitored across 7 years. Then there is the data set of Patrick and myself in the managed forest areas in southern Germany, where we monitored colonies in black woodpecker cavities. There is also a data set from Uwe Lang, and he monitored 30 nest sites in the city of Dortmund. Then there is a study by Vincent Albouy in France, where he observed 140 colonies across 3 years. And there is a data set where we worked with a colleague in Spain, Alejandro Machado, and we observed that honeybees there, they often use these hollow power poles for nesting. Then there is a citizen science project, Honeybee Wild in Luxembourg, that is ongoing, and you can see that the colonies there are all over the country. And there is another citizen science project in Switzerland from Free the Bees, where Francis Cordion used this data and analyzed the survival rate of these colonies in Switzerland. This is also an ongoing project. And the last but not least, this data set from Oliver Weissig in South England that was recently published, where he observed 61 nest sites across 3 years. So we can look at this again in this table. So we have, for all these data sets, we have the survival. And with this, we already come to the results. So you can see on the y-axis is the population that starts with 1. And on the x-axis, you see the year from 0 to 10. And for the populations in Germany and Switzerland, you can see that after 10 years, the population is gone. For Spain, Poland, France, and Luxembourg, you see a decline, but even after 10 years, you see that there is still a fraction of the population there. And for England, you can see that the population is stable or even increasing. If we look at Europe, as a whole, so if we take the median for Europe, we see this gray line that is also declining, but also after 10 years, we still have a fraction of the population. And so this means we can use this definition from the IUCN for assessing a wild subpopulation, and we are allowed to make an assessment of Apis mellifera in the wild in Europe. If you look at it a bit differently, you can see it with these bar diagrams. So again, you see in England an increase of the population, and on the other end, in Germany and Switzerland, how the population vanish. And in Europe, we see a decline of 56%. And to the right, you can see the IUCN categories. So from least concern to vulnerable, endangered, and critically endangered. And minus 56% in this case means that it's justified to list Apis mellifera as endangered. And this was later also adopted by the IUCN, at least for the European Union. So, of course, this is a great success, but also if you look at the map, you can see that there is still many countries where we don't have this survival rates yet, and there are, of course, also many regions. So I want to use this to motivate to collect more data so that when the next reassessment will take place, that we have more data, and this will probably be around 2035. Also, this we decided that this study that I presented here, that we will update. So we will have a living document, and if new survival rates are published, we will update it. And also, for example, if some people already have survival rates and they want that we include this in this analysis, they can get in touch with me. And with that, I want to thank you for your attention. You can also contact me by email, and I give the word back to Steve.
Thank you, Benjamin. Lots of information. And what I really appreciate is that I would say 95% of the research studies that you referenced, the people are represented here. So there's Ali and Uwe and Andrzej and others. So obviously the work that you're doing is being supported by these people, and they're very curious about what we've done with IUCN and what is next.